right, so we're going to get started this afternoon with the patient panel, which was a ginormous highlight of last year for sure. So I'm going to introduce Allison, who's going to be the moderator for the panel. So Allison Sim has a keen interest in educating health professionals about the latest science surrounding pain, especially pain that hangs around, chronic or persisting pain. Allison qualified as an osteopath in 2001. She has a Master's of Pain Management from Sydney University Medical School and Royal North Shore Pain Management Research Institute. She has lectured at Australian Catholic University, Victoria University, RMIT, and George Fox University in a variety of science and clinical subjects. She has also worked as part of a teaching team at Deakin University Medical School and is currently based in Melbourne, Australia. Allison works at a pain clinic in Geelong. Yes. Okay, so Allison's going to come up with the panel and introduce the rest of them.
Thank you, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Rajam, for allowing us to host what was quite a successful panel last year. I'm going to allow our panellists to introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there. So, Keith, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly.
Good afternoon. My name is Keith Meldrum. I would like to thank Rajam for the opportunity to be here. The reason I'm here is I am a person who lives with persistent pain as a result of a car accident in August of 1986, in which I was sort of torn in half by a seatbelt as I left the highway because I was asleep and mostly intoxicated. So since then, I've had numerous surgeries and lots of medical interventions, but I continue to live with persistent pain every day. But I've come to a point over the last few years where through reading and pain research and science and self-management, I've learned to live better with pain every day.
Thank you, Keith. Kira.
Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps we can move this back a little bit. Am I allowed to do that without pulling out all the plugs? Yeah, it's all wired. Don't do that.
My name is Kara Stoops. I'm actually a brand strategist from Bozeman, Montana. I have had chronic pain since I was 6 years old, and I divide my life in two parts. Up until 3 years ago, I thought I was a severe chronic pain patient because I had a high level of pain all the time, but I could hike and ski, and I was a senior ski patroller and fairly active with that pain. 3 years ago, I had been pushing and sneezed funny and threw out my neck. One of those days where you can't turn your head side to side. I thought I'd be better in a few days, and it took over a year for me to turn my head again, and I became what I now consider a real severe chronic pain patient where pain significantly limits my life. In order to cope, I tried to find out as much information as I could, and I wound up joining the Facebook group that many of you are part of. I thought it was like a Lorimer Moseley fan club, which was what I was looking for.
We are.
And we are in some ways, but I love the conversations I got into the people with there, but I realized there were some that weren't really appropriate for me to have as a patient. I wanted to talk to other patients, started a sister Facebook group called Biopsychosocial, which some of you were part of, and made some really great connections there. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Kira. And Bronnie.
And I have my my coat of many colours. I brought a piece of Keith with me to give me courage. I'm Dr. Bronnie Thompson. I live with fibromyalgia. I did not connect the dots that I had fibromyalgia until probably about 10 years ago, but I had chronic pain from about 20. I was 20, 21, when a patient and I collided in mid-doorway. He was larger than me. I call it the tango in the doorway, and I landed uncomfortably underneath him, and I went through the process of lots of treatment, but carried on working. But I did get sent finally to the pain service in Auckland with Dr. Mike Butler, who's a rheumatologist, and he gave me Melzack and Wall's The Challenge of Pain book to read. And that was my enlightenment moment, I suppose. So I have learned how to live well with pain ever since. And I live really well with pain, generally, until I drink too much gin.
I feel like we've been passing the baton of the gin and unwellness through this summit. So yeah, it was Bronnie's turn today. Our narrative about pain education or explaining pain is very much one about the idea that we tell people, we explain people, we give them enough information. They take that, they bring their self-efficacy up and they run with it and they get better functional outcomes. And hopefully with that, a drop in pain scores. And certainly, to an extent, that's pretty much exactly what Bronnie has just described. If you've ever heard Joletta Belton speaking, that is the message. I suffered, I had pain, I was fit and healthy, I learnt about pain, I expanded my life and started to live life rather than be chasing the pain, and things got better from there. That also sounds a lot like Keith's story. Would you agree with that, Keith? In a perhaps longer version. Yeah. For Kira, though, that clear-cut, nice narrative that we'd love to hear that makes us all feel warm and fuzzy hasn't quite worked out like that. And so, Kira, I wanted to ask you, based on your experiences, do you think that explaining pain is enough? And sometimes can you have too much information? Do you think that can sometimes be harmful? Can you explain to us how your story would integrate with some of those ideas?
Sure. You know those people who can't make a purchase decision until they've spent like 40 hours of research on like a mattress or whatever? That would be me. And so ever since I was 18 years old, Closer? Okay. Yeah. It's my first day. Ever since I turned 18 and left the house, I have sought more information about why I was in pain. And some of it's been quite helpful. In 2008, I threw out my back, and while I was laid up for the entire summer, I read John Sarno's books, which I know are not fully modernized, but at the time it introduced me to the idea that I might not actually be damaged, I was just hurting. And through that, I was able to overcome a terrible bout of lower back pain. So when I threw out my neck severely in 2016, I took the same approach. By then, Explaining Pain had come out. There were a lot more resources. I learned everything I could. I will say in my case, I didn't have a provider to walk me through these ideas at first. So I was self-educating by reading these books. And I was taking away the notion that if I could get on board with movement not being harmful and looking for DIMS and SIMs and regulating those things, that I would be able to overcome my own pain. And it was increasingly frustrating when I could not. I have meditated, I have listed my DIMS and SIMs, I have been, I think, a dream patient in that respect. And it wasn't a magic bullet, and I didn't get better, and I am in more pain now than I was 3 or 4 years ago. I think in many ways, of course, I think the pain science education that we have now is so much better than the old magic bullet cures and interventional cures that we had before, and I don't want to discount its importance at all. But it is, despite how many people it has helped, it's not helping everyone, and I would be representative of that population of patients that falls outside maybe the expected data. We say expectations drive outcomes. I fully expected to get over my neck twinge in 3 days, and I sit here 3 years later still suffering from it. I can have a wealth of knowledge, and at this time now have providers to help me walk through it, and it's not going to take me out of pain. I love that I can sit next to Bronnie and she can say that she's living a beautiful life with pain, but I do not share that sentiment. I do love my life, and It is much better than it has been in the past, and I'm grateful for all the strides that I have made, but I would love to take a pill and be out of pain. And I know that's a controversial thing to say in this room, but I would do it.
Thank you, Kira. Yeah, I think that's it's not a narrative that necessarily fits with what we would hope to understand, and I think it's really, really important for us to hear these stories because it does bring home the idea that pain is really complex. Pain is very individual, and that a particular approach is not necessarily going to work. And in some ways, Kira and I yesterday were talking about just how that idea that she had so much information. She graded exposure to the letter. She was the best graded exposurer there was. And who knows? Like I look at what her treatment and her approach was, and to me it sounds in a lot of ways like it was perfect. But sometimes things don't work out as we would hope. So it's really important for us to hear those stories. Bronnie, you recently wrote a blog post, and if you haven't read any of Bronnie's blog posts, please make sure that you do. She's a prolific writer, and they're amazing research and evidence-informed blogs that are very clinically based as well. But you were talking about othering, us versus them, putting people in boxes. Can you tell us a little bit what you mean about that?
Yeah, I'm probably like many of you in that I do have pain that has not changed. What's changed is my attitude towards it, that it's okay and I'm not going to harm myself. But when I inhabit these different worlds of being a provider, so I treat people, of an educator and I educate people, clinicians to know how to work with others who have chronic pain or persistent pain. And I'm often online. Most of you will have had some interaction with me. What I notice is that there is a tendency for us and theming. So us could be, we are the people who are treaters. We are the people who know what to do. We are the people who have answers, and we can sometimes inadvertently and sometimes overtly them, the people that we are trying to help, forgetting that we could also be one of them, and I am one of those. So when I hear people talk about non-compliant patients, unmotivated patients, patients who don't do their home exercise program, patients who don't want to do they really don't want to get better, I feel really awkward because I'm one of those. And I'm sure we would also be one of those if we were in that situation. So theming and othering is a process that we do naturally as we become aware of someone else who is different from us. And what we tend to do is identify the things that are like us and the things that are different, and those differences are seen as less than or not quite as good as, or in some way negative. And that is hurtful when I'm the person sitting there being told, no, your diagnosis is not a diagnosis, actually. And that happens often. So fibromyalgia is not a thing, really. That, we should be doing XYZ exercise. And I'm not motivated because I don't do that. And I think my point about that is I'm interested to know how many of us are also those who are them. And can we find that common ground where we recognise that we are people? Ultimately, we are people who have had an experience and we spend time together.
And perhaps, Bronnie, not even necessarily are we those people, and we were going to ask the audience to poll the audience in a second. but that your reactions and the way you've come to be who you are quite understandable, given your pathway and the things that have led you down that journey. And therefore, as you say, it could be anyone. And I often sit there when I'm sitting with patients and think, could this be my mum? Yeah. Could this person be my brother? Are they very understandable? So on that note, could we have a raising of hands of people who would have lived with pain for 3 months or greater? Great, so just at a rough guess, I'd say about half of the audience there. And I would say, most of the numbers that we look at worldwide are between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 is what most of the stats say. People live on average with pain at any one time for more than 3 months. And I think we are a bit of a self-selecting audience. I think having had pain, you create a lot of compassion for it, and you're often drawn to those services, which is quite common. Keith, I'm going to bring you in here because I know that idea of separating the patient out of a consult is something that is very dear to your heart and that you're working at institution level to try and change, because you feel that by not collaborating with a patient that you're changing healthcare systems. And we were talking last night about this idea that, let's say the orthopaedic consult, where if they're rushing you through and that very much is set up as an othering occasion, it's very much short, closed questions. There is not a lot of collaboration about the decision making. It's often very directive and patriarchal. But again, Keith's from Canada, I'm from Australia, where we have socialised healthcare. There are bottom line dollars that actually dictate this. And if we want to double or triple our intake consults, we're going to blow out our budget, but we're also going to blow out our wait lists, and we're not necessarily going to be able to cater to anyone. But you had a bigger take on that, which was if governments could step back and look at this in a bigger picture, that actually might be a worthwhile investment. Can you expand on that idea a little bit for me?
Just to step back a little bit to add some context to that, getting back to sort of living well with pain, I put myself sort of between Bronnie and Kira, where I've learned almost by default to learn to live better with pain, but that was my interface with the medical system after my car accident was tragically horrible. I was treated terribly. I had trauma. My car accident nearly killed me. I was in the ICU for 2 weeks, and the nurses told my parents, well, he's trying to die, but we won't let him. And then after that, all the surgeries and all the consultations with the doctors and the surgeons, I was left not as a human being, but just simply a medical case of here's what we're going to do to you. And then the older I got and the more sort of pain that I developed, and those interactions with the healthcare providers got to be even less and less. I was dehumanized even more. Evidence-based medicine, while important, is very reductionist. It's here is your problem, and here's how we fix it, and then you go away. And when you break it down to here's your problem, but we can't figure out how to fix it, then you just go away. So not providing an opportunity for the person who has pain to be an active participant of that as compared to, I feel like I was literally forced to just be a visitor to the process. That, hell, I didn't even need to be there. All they needed to do was flip over in the chart and they'd tell me what to do. They could have done it by a friggin' phone call and said, be in by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning and we'll do another procedure. I did not feel like I was a human being. I really didn't. And it was very, very frustrating. And I fully believe by integrating the patient into their healthcare, we talk about the patient narrative and the patient story, whatever you want to call it, until we change that lens of that healthcare interface where the provider is God and the patient is there because you have to be, which is how I felt sometimes, like I'm sorry, but I need some help, until we can move to more of a collaborative, open, therapeutic alliance built on trust and relationships, I don't think we're going to see the changes that we need to see in the healthcare system. And we talk about, yes, it's money and it's time. Well, governments are very good, and again, Canada has socialized healthcare, so it's much easier, and I used to work in government, so it's much easier as a bureaucrat just to add another zero to the budget for the next year and just keep doing what we're doing because that's easy. as compared to blowing the whole thing up, taking a step back and saying, maybe we do need to invest some time and money now, but in X years, the ROI will come back because we're going to make people healthier, better, faster, and get them back into a life where they're not interfacing with the healthcare system all the time. I was all the time, I was 4 or 5 times a year. I was into the ERs, and I can't even imagine how much money I cost the Canadian healthcare system. Thank God it didn't cost me personally. I'd be bankrupt. 18 surgeries and probably 45 hospital admissions. I'd have no financial life. Until we change that outlook and get people being participatory and having the system listen to the person as a valid part of their care, which the fact I even have to say that is staggering, is where we need to be.
And I think you made the point beautifully that just in the setup, if we had longer consults and allowed the patients to have a narrative and a dialogue and create a relationship in the start, but also then to be a genuine collaborative part of the decision-making process, as part of the team, as part of the direction, that immediately, as you said, that immediately puts them in from a passive space into an active space. And there's really good science that tells us both that patients who adopt active approaches get better outcomes, and patients who have better therapeutic alliance with their practitioners get better outcomes. And therefore, if we are going to be the people who are holding the purse strings, that is worth investing in. It's just whether we can convince governments to actually take that on board. And these are very entrenched models of care. This is not going to change in a hurry. But isn't it wonderful that we're able to talk about this in forums like this? Yeah. Thank you, Keith. That was really well expressed. Kira, coming back to the idea of the othering that Bronnie was talking about, you had some interesting consultations that you described as, what did you call them? Circus freak consultations. Can you speak to that for me?
I can. It was a number of years ago when I kept experiencing the phenomenon of providers being astonished at how I presented, and I found it really disconcerting because I didn't feel like I was that interesting of a case. So I would, in one interaction, I showed a provider the amount of crepitus that I had in my shoulder, which I don't even know if it would translate to a microphone. Can't really show you guys, but it's pretty extreme. And he jumped away and raced to get someone from a provider from a different room, like, come here, come look at this, look at what she can do, which I found it was just very strange. I'm like, okay, I'll show you my crunchy shoulder too, which it's just crepitus. We've all seen it. No big deal, right? But that certainly wasn't the only time. One time I had a clinician jump away from me in horror saying, I've deactivated all of your trigger points and your shoulder is now completely unstable. I don't know what to do. You have to see someone else. So
Ouch.
It was alarming to me to be alarming to them. I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah. And staying with you there, Kira, you'd found that some of the best support and information hasn't come from clinicians, but has actually come from the forum. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Absolutely, and I think it certainly could come from clinicians. I haven't personally gotten as much practical type help. Some of the struggles that I have are really basic. Like, I can't, for a long time, I only ate vegetables because I could not walk around the entire grocery store and I was too embarrassed to use the little Zoomy cart. So overcoming obstacles like that, a PT is usually not offering you advice on how do you do your laundry when you can't walk down the stairs. But I did have this great community of people on Facebook who were going through the same struggles I was, even though I didn't have anyone in my direct life that I knew with chronic pain that was approaching it from the angle I was, which was not to take opiates and not do many interventions. I had this great community online who could offer their support in practical matters to some degree, but almost more just how do you reset your mind frame to move forward with this, sorry, I'm going to say it, torturous experience. It's a hard thing, and their compassion has meant a lot to me, and they get it on a deep level. I will say for everybody who raised their hand earlier, who is a clinician practicing with chronic pain, in a way you have such a great edge because you understand what it's like, and you understand those little challenges of like, well, I have to wear leggings because I can't unbutton my jeans to go to the bathroom, basic things like that. For me, discovering that one of my clinicians had MS made us so much closer and made me trust him more. I don't think you have to have chronic pain to be a great clinician. If you can listen and empathize, of course, you can see what it's like. But in a way, it does help.
Yeah, and I think that I loved the way you told that story yesterday about just the depth of the connection you felt with that therapist once he had told you about his MS and your thoughts around that, which were along the lines of, other people are suffering too, and he's understanding what's going on here. I really liked that idea.
I was much more revealing with Allison in our chat because this story makes me sound like such a jerk, but I had been feeling very sorry for myself living in a super sporty town, and I was being treated by a PT who rock climbed and backpacked, and he was awesome in every way. And I was griping about how I was going to meet my deductible, and it's very expensive here in America, and how he'd never have to worry about something like that because he was this super fit PT. He paused for a moment and then was like, actually, I already met my deductible because I just had my MS transfusion. I live with chronic pain every day. So sticking my foot that far into my mouth and getting that response from that clinician was, it was great. It was great to see that he was able to do those things, but also understand what I was dealing with.
I love your story, Kieran, how it speaks to that complexity and the individual nature of pain, and how it hasn't been clinicians who have been of most benefit to you, that it has been the online connections and the community that's been created there. Bronnie, you and I have often talked about the idea that some of these online forums can become pity parties, and that they're probably more helpful. They're doing more harm than good. Why do you think this one has been a bit more of a success?
I think.
Not on.
Oh. So which group? The Kira's group?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I think because we're really keen to learn more, to understand more. I think that idea that we know we don't have to go through the backstory, do we? We don't have to, I've got chronic pain, this is what it means to me, blah, blah, blah. We can just focus on, we want to be ourselves. That's all. It's not a really major thing. It's just, we just want to be ourselves. And that, however we want to express being us, being me, is something that we all honour, and we just contribute on an equal footing. I think that's really important in clinical interactions as well, that we are remembering that we are expert only because we've heard a lot more stories. We might have read a little bit more. What we're not expert on is this person's life and how they're going to live that way. That's where the person that we're working with is the expert. And if somebody says, well, you need to go out and do strength training, and I am looking at one of my students here, because strength training is really good, I want to know, in this group we can find out, well, how can I fit that into my life? What does that look like to me? It might not be going to the gym. In this case, Rachel gave me some stretchy bands. So I can do my strength training with stretchy bands, because I can do that anywhere. And that's the sort of, in my research, the people who are living well talked about little acts that clinicians did that were really making it personal. And I think that's what we do on the online group. We are making it, so here's a concept, now this is how I'm using it in my daily life. Because as an occupational therapist, that's really dear to my heart, that what we learn has got to be applied in the real world. And in this group, that's exactly what we're doing. This is our real world, our life. How can I apply this stuff in a way that works for us?
The really practical things that are on the ground. Yeah, thank you, Bronnie. Keith, I would imagine over the years that you've seen a large number of clinicians, and you've described some pretty horrendous consultations. Can you describe times that you have had good consultations with clinicians? What have been the factors around that consultation that's made it good?
Yes, because there is good with the bad, and I think having gone through many years, nearly 20 years of really poor interface and clinician interactions, that changed for me about 15 years ago when I was referred to an interventional pain clinic, and I went because nothing else was working, and it's part of that sort of story of desperation. I'll try anything as long as it won't kill me. Even then, maybe, what the hell, it's worth it. But my expectation was yet again that this will just be another sort of consult, and I'll sit there and they'll fill out some paperwork and we'll have a nice conversation and they won't really listen. But what caught me off guard was when I was going through the intake or the potential intake for this clinic, and the intake doc was filling out the forms, I realized at some point, and some of you have heard this story, that everything just stopped. And I thought, oh shit, I've done it again. I've pissed somebody off. And I looked up, and he said, "It's okay, we believe you." And 20 years of building up walls of anger and frustration and grief and more anger were probably suddenly broken down when my experience was validated by what I considered the healthcare system. And that was literally the turning point for me. And so all the negative interfaces were completely wiped out, I can say, by that. And that's what allowed me to really sort of turn the corner and start to move on to the path that I have been on for the last 15 years.
That's really quite poignant. That gave me goosebumps. Yeah, you felt believed. He said, "That's okay, I believe you." Yeah.
It's one of the most important things I would offer in my experience is for people who live with chronic pain, or probably any chronic condition, but pain because it is that invisible illness and all that, is the validation of the person and their experience. Because it is so stigmatizing on its own to have the healthcare system dismiss you, which I was at 19. After operation 4 or 5, I was told there's nothing wrong with you anymore. We've fixed everything. So it's all in your head. For the next, almost 20 years, I lived with the fact that it's all in my head and trying to figure out why I would be making all this up, because it really feels like it hurts. So to have that removed by being validated I don't have too many life-changing experiences in my life. My marriage is one of them, and being told we believe you is probably the other one.
Wow, thank you. Kira, if you were to give advice to clinicians, which here's your chance, what's one skill or one area that you think we could get better at in perhaps making that first impression? Do you think that's an important part of creating rapport from your side of the fence?
Absolutely, it's an important part of creating rapport. Can you be a little more specific? I'm not quite sure.
Or perhaps you could reflect on times that haven't gone well. And I know you were talking about a particular doctor that you were seeing, or specialist that didn't, where things didn't kick off so well. How do you think you could either reflect on the negative side of that, or what would you take out of that might be a more positive experience?
So reflecting on one of my worst doctor's appointments was a doctor who came into the room and immediately started talking. I had a 2-hour consult, which was great, but he talked for the entire consult. When you've been a patient for a long time, you get a little tired of telling your story. So I had actually just typed mine out and started handing it out as a handout for the past couple years, which I'm sorry to all of you that were robbed of active listening. But he had reviewed my handout, and he had 2 hours of things to say about it, which were patients like you don't get better. There's no point in doing any testing. You're just going to spend a bunch of money and not figure anything out. You just have to learn to live with it and accept it. And this consult wasn't even for my chronic pain. It was for a chronic fatigue diagnosis that he then gave me. I didn't have, 7% of people recover from chronic fatigue syndrome. So for me, it felt like a death sentence. I left that appointment, stopped working, have not resumed working yet, and just felt a total loss of hope that I had not experienced ever, having chronic pain and health problems since I was 6 years old. So I don't think anyone in this room would ever go into an appointment and just talk the whole time and rob the patient of hope, but that would be an example not to follow. In the end, it turned out I had just been taking probiotics that disagreed with me, that they laid me flat. And it sounds impossible, but I might have a lot of markers of chronic fatigue syndrome, but that's not exactly what I have. And so that doctor maybe could have listened a little bit. I can tell from the support group that I run, biopsychosocial, so many people have said the experience of being listened to and validated is the most important one, just to echo and underline what Keith said.
Thank you. That's wonderful, and yeah, very very consistent ideas and themes coming through. One of the doctors that I work with very recently put a poster that sits behind his head where he consults, and it says, "Patients in pain do not have to say sorry." I really love that. I think it's just such a nice, reassuring thing for patients to read. I'm going to hand over to our audience now. We'll take some questions from the audience. So if you guys are happy with that, does anyone have a question to start with? Yeah, down here. There's microphones coming around for our volunteers.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're there.
Any tips for a spouse who has had some chronic pain but is dealing with someone who's had multiple surgeries, is responsible for using medication, and yet it's a struggle? I mean, I'm a massage therapist, so I'm caregiving a lot. Those of you who have a spouse, how does that go?
I am spouseless, so it's one of these two.
Well, I can tell you how I did it wrong for the first long time. As somebody who lives with pain, I think you need to respect that your spouse, you're not hiding anything from them. And by trying to protect her from what I felt what I was doing was protecting her, I was just causing her more stress, because as she would say to me, dummy, I can see it on your face. I'm like, oh, no, everything's fine. She's like, no, you're not. So for me, I've had to and continue to work on, because I'm still not the best at it, just being open and honest. Because my wife and I have had some pretty good conversations about how hard it is for her. And I get that, she's had a couple of bouts of some things, and, when my son is sick, I flipped that around, and I know how hard it is for me. I'd rather be the one going through something to see somebody else go through it. So I just think it's important to be open and honest, and say when it's a really bad day, say it is a really bad day, and just look to them to help however they can. And over the years with my wife, we've sort of learned different techniques and different ways to just help me because I still have the really bad days, and but now instead of trying to hide it from her or like physically even leave the area, I'm more open and honest with her about it. So.
I can add to that. So my partner has ankylosing spondylitis, and for until 6 years ago, when he went on to Humira, which he now has no pain, which is astonishing. But for a good 6 years, we struggled because he couldn't roll over at night, and I was using a slidey sheet to help turn him. He couldn't cough. The way that we communicate now is that If I need something, I will ask. If he needs something, he will ask. We don't mind read because trying to determine whether I'm sore or he's sore, we realise we were really bad at it. Because we get very good at acting, don't we? We put on the happy face. The other person knows something's wrong, but they usually think it's something that they've done. And so then they get really angry because we're not telling them. And so for us, we realise that it's better to be clear about what we need. And so what does listening and caring look like? Well, for me, it might be Bo might take the dogs out for a walk for me, or vacuum the house because I hate vacuuming with a passion. And when he's not so good, which is not about pain at the moment, it's more about his job, then I'll do something like we'll have a meal together, I'll cook something that he particularly likes. So it's those little things, because I could whine an awful lot about my pain at home. I really could, but it's just not worth it. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that, Bronnie, because I think you are the embodiment of someone who lives well with pain, because it's not something I've ever heard you complain about. I've never really heard you complain about aches or pains or having bad days or anything like that. I think I know you well enough to say that. Another question? Yeah.
Thank you all for doing this. I thought last year's patient panel was one of the most powerful and useful to my practice. And I appreciate hearing you mention John Sarno's work. And I know a lot of people in the room know David Hanscom. And one of, at least what I took away from reading those things as well, one of the major skills both of those authors have suggested is to stop talking about pain, don't rerun those neural pathways. But I've conflicted on this as a point of discussion with colleagues who argue actually that might be really unhelpful. So I'm curious what your perspective is, because the science might say one thing, or the science might be gray, or a lot of words, but I would love to hear your perspective.
I needed to talk about my pain a lot for the first 2 years after I became a severe chronic pain patient, but I tend not to talk about it to, I guess, normal people. Most of my close friends, before I snapped my neck and it became very obvious by the way that I walked, didn't even know that I had lived with chronic pain my entire life. For the past 6 months or so, I have been trying to catch myself every time I even think about my pain and think about something different. And I was astonished how often it does come up for me. I mean, it's just the soundtrack behind my life. I've also stepped away in large part from running biopsychosocial because I think living the experience of chronic pain, talking about pain all the time, supporting others in pain is just a lot of pain for one person to take on. And so I think it's a balance. If you try to hide it, you might explode at one point. If you downplay it to clinicians, then they don't always understand the sheer brutality of what living with chronic pain is like. At the same time, I don't think it's healthy for anyone to dwell on their pain nonstop the way that I have in the past.
So I'm a painiac. You all know that I'm a painiac. And I've just written an autoethnography, and one of the processes is looking at my life and what has happened and commenting upon the social construct. And one of the things that struck me as I wrote it was a phrase I've put in about the daily micro decisions. There's a constant, every moment of the day, micro decisions that I need to make about how I sit, how long I sit, what I do, how stressed I am, how tired I am, all of these things. And for me, in effect, talking about pain is a way for me to distance it. And journaling is one way that we do that, to process an experience, to step away from the immediacy of it. So I am conflicted. I don't think whining about pain all the time is helpful, but by the same token, what a really good way to disempower somebody than to say, actually, you shouldn't be talking about your pain. You should be acting normal. I'm not normal. I have pain. That's not normal. Sorry, get a bit stroppy about that one.
Keith, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, it's something that I've sort of struggled with lately, more so in the last few years, where I've turned a lot more of my attention to what I consider my advocacy work and that, because I've lived most of my life, I mean, 2/3 of it, with pain. So I don't remember not having pain, and so I never talked about it before and did all those things, like, no, it's fine, and put it in a little box, and that doesn't work. So over the last 7 or 8 years, as I've become more involved in advocacy and started to bring it out more and talk about it, I found it has been helpful and therapeutic. For me, the science behind it, because I have an applied science background in engineering, so it's kind of cool to learn about all this stuff. But then there are times when I find it does get a little overwhelming, and I think, Bronnie, you and I shared some back and forth messages about just sort of about pain fatigue, and you're just like, am I shining too much of a light on this thing? Even though my efforts might be good, or I'm trying to help myself, sometimes it can be too much. So I don't think you shouldn't not talk about it, but I think I have a personal responsibility to be cognitive of what those conversations are really about.
Lovely insights there. Thanks, guys. Other questions from the audience? No? Excellent. All right. Well, I think we might wrap it up then, and we can go to a bit of an earlier break. I'd like you to give a really warm round of applause to thank our panel members.
Okay, so real quick before we go to break, Amy, do you want to come up? So just real quick before break, and then what time is break? 4:30. So after this, I'll just let Amy finish, but then once she's done, we'll be back at 4:30.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I am Amy. And I am so incredibly thankful to Rajem for putting this together so that we can be here and learn and share and grow. And my last year, I am part of the them and the us as a person that has experienced 20 years of pain and became a clinician. And I have spent the last year writing out my story. And I started writing out my pain story so that other people in pain didn't have to feel alone anymore. And the more I interacted with clinicians, the more I saw your pain in trying to help people in pain. And so as Rajem and I started talking, I really felt the desire to give you the gift of this book for free, in hopes that it will put some skin on the principles that we have talked about this weekend of compassion and space for your people in pain to grow, and kindness, and that all of the neuroscience that's so fascinating and we can talk about and pull apart to minutia, that as you read through my story, you can put a face on these concepts, and that the idea that you're not sure what to do next, that maybe me laying my soul bare enables you to figure that out differently. So in that year, I went back to when I was 18 and initially got hurt as a Division I swimmer, and I brought you through to today, and all of the terrifying things that swam around in my head through doctor's appointments and rehab. And I have words that have been used to describe it have been raw. It felt like I was inside of her head, which I'm warning you might be a slightly frightening place to be. But if you have a pen or your laptop or a phone, I would love for everybody to just download it and enjoy it. If you like it enough, on March 14th, if you would like to leave a review on Amazon, that would be great. I don't even want your email addresses. I really want this to be a gift to you so that you can just love people better. So where you're going to go is restoringvenus.com/SDPS. And the password is SDPS 2019. And you should be able to download it there. So thank you again for all you do to help the people that come to you.
Amy, can I trouble you just to say the password?
Yeah. Thank you, Allison. Allison asked me to repeat the password again, and it's SDPS 2019.